And I do want to get to the latest information coming in out of Israel at this hour, 1:02 on the East Coast and 10:02 on the West Coast. Take a look at your screen. This is actually a short video coming in from the Israel War Room. They say breaking during the holiest day of the year for the Jewish people, Yom Kippur, Hezbollah terrorists launched 2 drones from Lebanon towards central Israel. A nursing home that is over in Herzliya was damaged. Now, no casualties were reported. This comes, of course, as we have seen a lot of rockets that have been fired not just over the last several weeks, but really over the last day or so during this holiest day of the year for the Jewish people. There's another post from the Israel War Room saying that Hezbollah terrorists fire rockets and launch drones toward Israel during Yom Kippur. A lot to talk about here, so I do want to bring in a friend of the show. Enia Krivine is the Senior Director for the Foundation of Defensive Democracies, Israel Programs, and National Security Network. Thank you, as always, for taking the time to be here with us today.
Always great to be with you, Josh.
And really quickly, I did want to ask you about that short clip that we just saw and the fact that so many rockets have been fired at Israel. The fact that this did hit a retirement home or nursing home, does that show that Hezbollah is targeting civilians? They've always said, you know, we are targeting the military sites and things of that nature, but it hit a place where the older generations are living.
Yeah, Josh, thanks for sharing that video. I've seen it on the internet. Today was Yom Kippur, it's the holiest day on the Israeli and Jewish calendar. So it was a very quiet day today. Cars don't drive. A lot of people are offline, but I've been checking in to try and see what's been going on and saw that the drone strike in Herzliya. And what's interesting is at first people thought it came from Lebanon, and then there were reports that they in fact come from Yemen, which when you look at the trajectory of the drone coming from the Mediterranean Sea also makes sense. So we know that Yemen's been successfully firing drones at Israel. As far as where they are targeting, it's hard to know for sure. And I'll tell you why, because there's so many different proxies that are attacking Israel. I mean, Israel, as where I sit today, is in a 7-front war. So there's weapons and rockets and missiles and drones coming in from Gaza, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Iran itself now. So when you see a projectile coming like that and you're trying to identify where it's from, what quality it is, what was likely the target, how the originator of the weapon thinks and what they were planning, it's hard to put all those pieces together. But some of the adversaries say they're firing at military zones, although their accuracy leaves a lot to be desired often. And that's when you see these munitions going into civilian places.
And on that same note, we were told by the Israel War Room, really in the IDF, that approximately 230 projectiles were fired from Lebanon by Hezbollah toward Israel over essentially a 24-hour period here. My question for you, does it appear that Hezbollah is continuing to ramp up these attacks, or is it just because we are in the high holidays, or maybe a mix of both?
It's probably a mix of both. I mean, I'll just point out that there was immense pressure on Israel to curb the fighting in Gaza over the period of Ramadan, which is a holy month for Muslims. Of course, there's no recognition in the international community that Israel is under fire from these massive assaults during its high holidays, which come back to back. It's the Jewish New Year and then Yom Kippur. So during its highest of holy days, Israel is under fire. And it seems like this is a steady trajectory of escalation. Of course, everything became much higher stakes about 3 weeks ago when Israel went on the offense against Lebanon. And we've talked about almost 10,000 rockets from Lebanon until today. I just saw an update from the IDF that the number of rockets from Lebanon over the past 24-hour period over the weekend was 320. So it actually went up from the estimate you gave from earlier in the weekend, but 320 rockets. It sounds like a lot, but as we know, Hezbollah has hundreds of thousands of rockets. It was estimated at the beginning of the war to be up to 200,000. We know that they've been significantly degraded. but that still leaves several tens of thousands of rockets in their position. So while 320 over a 24-hour period sounds like a lot, we know that they have a lot of capabilities that they just haven't tapped yet. And that's what many Israelis are waiting for in this war. Israel's Homeland Security put out new guidance a couple days ago before Yom Kippur with a new response that Israeli civilians should take in the case of a massive attack. So what we've seen, most of us who are living here on a day-to-day basis, we get rocket alerts. We're told to go to a safe space, whether it's a reinforced room or a local bomb shelter, and wait 10 minutes and then go about your daily life. And generally schools aren't canceled when there's sirens, and in most communities, life goes on. This new type of alert that was issued is one that was previewed in the Iranian attack a couple weeks ago, which essentially says, go to your safe room and stay there and don't leave until you hear further guidance. And so this would be a preparation for a much larger attack. Iran has thousands of missiles. I've heard estimates of the type of ballistic missiles that they used in the last attack in Israel just a couple of weeks ago. These are missiles that are almost as big as a bus. These are missiles that are laden with explosives, and Iran has thousands of those in their arsenal, anywhere from 3,000 to 10,000. It's hard to know. As I said, Hezbollah has tens of thousands of rockets that they haven't yet spent, and the list goes on and on. So Israelis are prepared for something bigger. They know that the war goals are now Israel's on the offense. It has goals that it wants to achieve in Lebanon. It has an outstanding account open with the Iranians right now, and an Israeli response to the Iranian attack is on the table. So I think Israelis are just looking at the statistics, trying to stay calm, trying to stay rational, but understanding that there's more to come.
There have been questions about whether Iran will actually send some of the Iranian fighters, the Iranian military, over to Lebanon to fight alongside, so to speak, Hezbollah in battling Israel. Is that a genuine concern?
So Iran is over 1,000 miles, I think something like 1,800 kilometers from Israel. It is unlikely that they would be able to mount a conventional military attack. It would be a long way to get their troops. They would have to go through areas that were under surveillance from Israel and international coalitions. It seems unlikely. However, there are Iranian-backed militias throughout the region that could conceivably make their way to Syria and potentially Lebanon. And this is something that Israel has been on Israel's radar from the beginning. There were Iran-backed militias in Syria and Iraq that were announcing their intention to do just that early in the war. It hasn't quite materialized, but I'm not ruling it out. And don't forget, Iran has proxies and subsidiaries throughout the region, not only in Gaza with Hamas, but in the West Bank and in Jordan. There have been attacks that have come from the Jordanian border, Syria, Lebanon. They are kind of spoiled for choice when it comes to picking and choosing folks that they can support in attacking the Jewish state.
We've been talking a lot over the past couple weeks about how exactly Israel could retaliate against Iran. I know there's been a lot of discussion, and we heard from Netanyahu that it is going to happen and it is going to be a big retaliation. Do we have any insight? Because at this point, there are reports indicating that Israel has not specifically finalized a plan of any kind for that attack on Iran. Do we know if that means that it's not going to happen anytime soon? Obviously, a lot of this done in secrecy because you don't want to give a heads up to your enemy. But do we have any kind of insight on that?
So I don't think we have any inside track here. And as you said, I think that's intentional. Israel's not trying to leak its intentions here. We do know that there is a robust conversation going on between Jerusalem and Washington right now about what the attack can look like. And we are hearing leaks out of the U.S. administration that they are trying to tone down Israel's response. Now, watching Washington have this conversation with Jerusalem has been a little bit painful, I've got to say. At first, you have Washington saying the exact right things. You had Jake Sullivan coming out and saying that the U.S. is going to work with Israel to exact a severe response from the Iranians. You had Biden coming out very strongly saying that this was, that he backs Israel and there's going to be a strong response. But almost immediately after, Biden started publicly taking targets off the table, saying he was advising Israel not to strike the Iranian oil infrastructure, and that he was against Israel taking out Iran's nuclear facilities or nuclear infrastructure. So we do see a little bit of hedging from Washington. There are fierce negotiations going on between Jerusalem and Washington about how Israel should respond. And of course, Israel wants the U.S. on board. And the U.S. has generally been very good about being shoulder to shoulder with Israel when the rubber hits the road. And the U.S. can marshal an international coalition that has been very, very important in the defense of Israel. So what Israel is likely looking for is not necessarily U.S.'s help going on the offensive, but it likely wants the U.S. to remain shoulder to shoulder with Israel for any response that Iran might send, not only to Israel, but to the U.S. allies in the region. And Iran has already started threatening U.S. allies in the region. Iran has already started baring its teeth, saying that if there is an Israeli response, then Iran will launch a counter response. So I think that Jerusalem is working hard to keep the U.S. on side, not necessarily for offensive purposes, but mostly just for the long run, because this is likely going to go on. There will be a series of back and forth, and ultimately Iran must stand down and it must rein in its proxies. And hopefully, in a perfect world, that may even lead to more willingness by Hamas, by Sinwar in Gaza, to finally reach a hostage deal. That's the hope.
Enia, before I let you go, I did want to ask you if you're able to provide any sort of insight into the situation here with the UN peacekeepers. There's been a lot of discussion. We've seen several countries basically call out Israel for shooting at these peacekeepers. I believe there's 4 that were shot at, possibly injured. Can you provide some insight into that ongoing situation for folks who maybe don't fully grasp it?
I'm so glad you asked about that, Josh, because I'm actually working on a piece with a colleague about that. It's so important. So what your viewers need to know about this peacekeeping force, they're called UNIFIL, and they were established in the late 70s, but their mandate has grown and grown and grown over the past several decades. They are now a peacekeeping force of over 10,000 people. They're funded by the international community from dozens of countries, and they exist in southern Lebanon, and they have one job, and that is to prevent armed organizations like Hezbollah from becoming a threat to southern Lebanon, from becoming a threat to Israel. So one might ask themselves, what has this organization of 10,000 plus international peacekeeping forces been doing for the past 20 years? Well, Hezbollah has been arming up, building infrastructure, building terror tunnels into Israel. Hezbollah in southern Lebanon has an arsenal that are as big as some state actors. They are the biggest, the biggest and most well-armed non-state actor in the world. And here you have 10,000 people, so this relatively small area, that their one job was to prevent them from becoming a threat. And so we knew, people who watch this issue and have been watching it understand that UNIFIL has not been potent. They understand that UNIFIL has been unable to do their job. And about several days ago, Israel, the IDF, asked UNIFIL to please leave southern Lebanon so that Israel could finally tackle these terrorist organizations that have been building up under the nose of UNIFIL, and UNIFIL refused to leave. So there it is in southern Lebanon while this war is raging, and the IDF actually just in the last 24 hours put out a notice about the incident you mentioned where a UNIFIL worker was hurt, saying that Hezbollah was attacking the IDF within a dozen meters or a few dozen meters of the UNIFIL installation. So once again, you have a terrorist organization, Hezbollah, using a UN organization, UNIFIL, as a human shield as it attacks Israel. And the irony of this is, for the last decades, UNIFIL's one job has been to prevent Hezbollah from becoming the massive force that it is today, that is threatening the stability along Israel's border, that's caused tens of thousands of Israelis to be evacuated from their homes. And now you see this war playing out. It could have all been prevented if these peacekeepers could have actually fulfilled their mandate.
All right. Enia Krivine there at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us and provide some insight. A lot of questions there and a great conversation as always. Anything else you want to add about anything before I let you go?
Thanks, Josh. I think we covered it today.
All right. Thank you again. I will see you, I'm sure, very, very soon.
I hope so. Good to see you, Josh.